Hello, Soundies. Welcome to our Sound for Video session. Today is the 18th of July, 2021, and hope everyone's doing well. For those that are experiencing hot weather, stay cool as best you can. For those in Germany, we hope you're doing okay in terms of staying above the floodwaters. And welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Let's go to our agenda and take a look at what we've got going on for today. First up, we're going to do a little live stream behind the scenes and with an especial focus on the audio setup. So we'll look at everything, but I think we're going to spend more time on the audio setup. And it's been a while since we did a behind the scenes, so I think it's time for another one. And this one, again, more focus on audio. And then we have some questions that were submitted ahead of time, so we'll turn to those, and then we'll go back to the chat and see what other questions people have out there. So let's go ahead and let's make the switch here to our little mobile camera here. I've got a wireless camera set up, so let me just switch over to that microphone. Okay, we're getting audio okay? All right. And here is our wireless cam here. So let me just get my handle situated. Try not to be too wobbly here for you. Okay, so let's just take a quick tour here. First up, this is a kind of a rat's nest of cabling, but we don't generally leave the entire thing set up. But first of all, of course, the core of our live stream setup here is the ATEM Mini Extreme, which you see sitting right back there. And then I guess we should say hello to Danny. Here's Danny, who's running things over here. You can see here is the chat laptop over here. So any chat that she puts up on the screen, she uses the plugin that was put together by Aaron Parecki. And it's actually a fellow in Japan that actually wrote the original code, but Aaron packaged it up and kind of polished the edges a little bit. Of course, we have our 1ME advanced panel here, which connects via Ethernet to the ATEM. So this is where she actually does the switching here. And that may be a little bit out of focus there. So that's kind of a splurge that we got last year. We actually use that mainly with our big switcher, which we're not using currently. We had some problems with the encoder that was attached to it, but before, when we were using the big switcher, we have that in a rack that was sitting outside the door over here. And this is a little embarrassing to show, but we'll show you. This is a big coil of cables back here that we we have routed so that when we were using the big switcher or when we use the hyperdeck, which is in that rack as well, we have those cables all ready to go to connect everything up. So with the hyperdeck, for example, connecting it to the ATEM Mini, what you have to do is you have to run both an HDMI cable or in our case, we actually run an SDI cable from the hyperdeck to underneath the desk here, and then underneath the desk we have a decimator converter which takes it from SDI to HDMI, and then that runs into the ATEM Mini. And then you also have to have the hyperdeck connected to the same Ethernet network so that you can trigger it. So you can tell it when to play, whatever you want to play back from the hyperdeck or record or whatever you're doing with it. Of course, here on screen, this is the Big Mac here, we use this, I call it a Big Mac, but this is running currently the ATEM software control, but we also put other apps on here. So we have a question a little bit later about time code, and we'll have that to show. We have our studio. So this is what's happening in the live stream right now. I have some documentation that we're going to refer to a little bit later. But that's the idea here is I've got all these things on screen so I can refer back to them and share them as necessary. So that Mac is also a source in the ATEM switcher. Over here we have our iPad with the agenda and the pre-submitted questions, so I control that. Back here as far as cameras are concerned, this is a little bit dark back here because there's not a lot of light, but there's the Canon C70 we're using as our main camera. And then this little handheld camera that I'm using right now is a Panasonic GH5, and I am using the Hollyland, I don't even remember what this thing's called now, the Mars 400S Pro to transmit wirelessly. As far as microphones on this camera, I'm actually just using a Rode Lavalier Go lavalier microphone plugged directly into the mic input on the GH5, and that's what you're hearing right now. So substantially different sound than you're used to hearing with the big mic over here. Speaking of the big mic, so the main mic we use is, of course, the Earthworks SR314. Looks like a rocket design from the 1950s. Kind of cool styling. Another thing I don't know if I've talked about this or not, but this boom arm right here is actually from OC White. It's really nice. It kind of it folds out of the way. I've really enjoyed it. It's pretty expensive. But today, or not today, but this week earlier, the company Elgato, which makes a lot of kind of gaming streaming products, has actually come out with a series of boom arms for microphones. One of them is this sort of low profile style that kind of stays down below and then comes up to get the microphone up close enough to you, in addition to an overhead boom. So I'm actually considering trying one of those out for my regular work desk over here. So for my day job. So this microphone is then routed over here, and let me just make sure that we're focused here, into the Rupert Neve Design Shelford channel. That's what you're seeing right here. This is a microphone preamplifier, an EQ, a compressor, and also a, I don't know what you want to call it for sure, but it has this red and blue silk. It kind of colors the audio a little bit, adds some saturation at different frequencies. So that's the Shelford channel, and we're going to come back and talk a little bit more about that. And then the output of this is a line level signal, and that goes back up into our Canon C70, which will also be relevant to one of the questions we have today from Mike, but we'll come back to that. So that's how I currently have things set up here. Let me make sure I covered all the inputs. So we have, as far as inputs, we have the main camera, the Canon C70. We then have the iPad with our question and agenda. We then have the chat computer, which we showed you earlier, which Danny is controlling. We have our super source, which is how we show that kind of, actually, could you put that up real quick? Danny's going to switch over to the super source. So that's going to be our, that's the iPad, that takes us the iPad and puts it in the main box, and then the main camera puts it in the small box. And so that's not necessarily an extra source. We have our Mac Pro, of course, which we covered before. And then we have this camera that you're seeing right now, the kind of mobile camera, wireless camera. So that's our overall setup. Let's talk a little bit more about the audio. So I want to sit down right here, and I'm going to put the camera so that it's facing the Shelford channel. This is something that we haven't, it's going to give me just a second here to get it oriented just right. And hopefully so it doesn't fall off the edge of the desk. That would be not good. Okay, and let's go ahead and switch back over to this camera. All right, so this is kind of a view at an angle, but I'll kind of talk you through things here a little bit. And so there are a couple things here. First of all, this is the preamplifier. So this is sort of a, let me just give you some kind of insights into how this works. I'll get even closer here just to make it easier. So this is more a traditional kind of design for a preamplifier. So in kind of the vintage world, you would have, gain wouldn't necessarily be a continuous dial, and in this case it's not. You can see it actually kind of clicks from spot to spot. So you have that, and then you have this trim to trim the gain. So the middle section is at 0 dB. Anything to the right, you can add up to 6 dB of gain, it looks like. And then to the left, it's minus 6 dB of gain. Of course, here's the phantom power to supply power for your condenser microphones. And then it also has a high-pass filter. Now, what's unique about this particular preamplifier, and it was our friend Lloyd Puckett who actually suggested I take a look at this, and actually we splurged big time for this. This is not a cheap preamplifier and channel, but we've been really, really happy with it. It does, something that's unique about the Rupert Neve designs is that typically on the input channels they include a transformer to provide some isolation. But that transformer also colors the sound a little bit and gives it some, I think, some really nice kind of saturation to it. That sounds, it has a very distinct sound to it, and you'll hear it on a lot of music records or recordings. And so that's part of kind of the magic of this particular one. Then of course we have our EQ, and with the EQ you have 3 bands. You have a low, mid, and high, and then you can select the frequencies. So here's where you select the low frequency, Don't know if that's close enough here. Let's get a little closer. So you can select the frequency. You can choose whether it's a peak or a shelf for the low frequency. For the mid, you can just choose how much you want to cut. And this is where you choose the frequency for the mid, cut, or boost. And you can choose how wide the cut or boost is with this button right here. And then over here we have our high frequency, and you basically get two choices, 8 kilohertz or 16 kilohertz. And then whether it's a peak or a shelf, and you get to kind of cut or boost that as well. So we use this a little bit for some of our, so if I need to de-ess a little bit, which I typically do, you can see we've done a little bit of a cut right there, and we're using it at 8 kilohertz, which is roughly in the range of where my sibilance sits. So that's what we do there. All right, next up we have the compressor. So the idea with the compressor is that this allows us to even out the audio levels a little bit so that I can boost them and make them a little bit louder. And that's how we use them in particular for our use case here. So here, of course, we have a threshold. This is the point at which the compressor starts to engage. We have the ratio. This tells it how much compression to do. So in this case, we have it set to 3:1, which is fairly mild. We could go milder at 2:1 or 1.5:1 if we wanted to, but you can go up to 8:1 as well. Here is how much makeup gain you apply. Here is how the compressor reacts in terms of attack and release. So we have it set currently to medium slow. And then we also have a blend here, and we're actually blending pretty close to 100%. And then you can also, you have this fast control that allows you to speed up.
You have a request to focus.
Request to focus. Okay. How's that?
Good.
All right.
Just don't move your hand.
Don't move my hand. So that actually just takes the existing kind of hard-coded values here from the attack and release setting and makes them, applies basically a factor of 70%, 0.7. So it changes the way that that reacts a little bit, and we'll take a closer look at that. We also have the silk over here, again, which is the kind of additional saturation, and you can add, it adds saturation at different harmonics. The red adds kind of high frequency saturation, and the blue adds low frequency saturation. So, and you can dial in how much of that you want to apply. So you can basically blend the original signal with some of the saturation, or take it all the way to 100% and just present the saturated signal. So I'm going to go ahead and put this back up here and kind of put it in a fixed position. Give me just a second here. Okay, so that's a little bit askew. It's going to be a little bit difficult to hear, but what I want to do is kind of talk through some things. So I'm going to switch back over to my main microphone. Give me just a second for that. Okay, you should be hearing me on the main mic. Is that right? Okay, all good there. So I've unplugged the lav mic so I don't pull that camera over. Let me just kind of demonstrate a few of the things here. So I'm going to turn the compressor off, and I'm going to turn the EQ off for now. Okay, so that's what it sounds like without the compressor or the EQ. You may have heard a little bit of a difference. So the gain here, again, as I mentioned before, it's in discrete steps. So right now it's set at 48 dB of gain for this particular microphone, plus the trim here. So I'm probably adding another dB here. So the idea in this particular case is that the transformer, in this particular design, the transformer actually does the initial stage of amplification. So it adds the first 15 dB of gain, and then from there it uses a Class A preamp on top of that to add whatever you set here. So kind of an interesting design there. We can bump it up. I'm going to go ahead and bump up to 54 dB of gain. Okay, so you should hear, that should be coming in just a little bit hotter. And we could run it like that if we weren't using the compressor. I'm going to go ahead and back off a little bit. And let's talk about the high pass filter a little bit. I'm going to turn that off. Okay, so there's with no high pass filter, and then I'll turn it back on. You may or may not be able to hear any of this. There may or may not be a difference, but really that's just going to try and take care of any kind of low frequency stuff we have going on in here. We do have some fans going, and in fact, you're probably hearing a fan from not only the ATEM Mini, but also from the wireless transmitter, which is sitting on top of the camera right here by the microphone that I'm talking into. So it's going to be picking some of that up, but usually we put that on somewhere in the maybe 60 hertz range. All right, let's go ahead and bring the EQ back in. Essentially right now for low frequency, I'm doing nothing. That's just at neutral right now. But let me go ahead and play a little bit with this mid-range. I'm going to go ahead and boost it up. So here we're boosting the mid-range some. So it may start to sound a little harsher. And then I'm going to go ahead and cut. Let me cut to an extreme here. And now you can hear a difference there. You're definitely getting a kind of a Y. Actually, let me put my headphones on for this. So you're getting very much kind of the U EQ kind of sound to it. I think somewhere here in the middle is probably where we want to be in most cases. And then for the high frequencies, actually, just so you're aware, that was a 900 hertz cut and boost. So kind of mid-rangey stuff. Right around there is where my voice tends to be a little bit harsh. I have a little bit of a resonance there. And then another one at about 2K as well. But next up, we have the high frequency. And here I'm using this mainly as a de-esser. Let me go ahead and boost it. Protect your ears. If you have your headphones on really loud, I'm going to go ahead and boost it. She sells seashells by the seashore. Okay, now we're going to pull that down. Let me pull it all the way down. She sells seashells by the seashore. Now it sounds like I have a lisp. But this, if I put it about right here, she sells seashells by the seashore, that's a little bit closer to reality. Maybe just a little bit more of a cut. She sells seashells by the seashore. So you can use that basically as a de-esser. Now we'll go ahead and turn the compressor back on. Now this VU meter right here, you have a couple of different views. This is the gain reduction view. And you can see as I talk here, we're doing 1 to 2 dB of gain reduction from the compressor, just to kind of, again, even things out just a little bit. As I talk a little louder, you can see it gets more aggressive and pulls it down a little bit more. First of all, we have our threshold, so that's currently set. Remember, this is an analog device, so these numbers are a little bit different than you're used to seeing when you're thinking of a digital peak meter, which is a digital full-scale meter, typically. This one actually extends up to plus, I think the operating range is up to plus 20 dBu, or maybe possibly a little bit higher than that, but that's where your threshold sits. So right now we're at about -4, maybe -5, -6, somewhere in that range. And so that's when the compressor is engaging. Again, a 3-to-1 ratio. Let me go ahead and bump this up to an 8-to-1 ratio just so you can hear the effect of that. So here's an 8-to-1 ratio, and probably sounding a little bit more crushed, a little bit more, a little too extreme, really, for dialogue in most cases. Bumping that back out to 3-to-1. So there's our 3-to-1 ratio. Now this one is interesting here. This is how fast the compressor reacts, both in terms of attack and release. And in fact, let's go ahead and cut over to the Mac here, and let me just show you what those look like here. So here's some time constants. So this is what it works on these different settings. So if you set it to fast, the attack is between is that
Milliseconds?
No, this one is not.
That's microseconds.
Microseconds is what I thought, yeah. Up to 1.8 milliseconds, and then the release is 100 milliseconds to 150 milliseconds. The medium fast, again, 750 microseconds to 5.25 milliseconds, release a little bit longer. Medium, 2.7 milliseconds to 18 milliseconds attack, and then release is 350 to 525, and then medium slow, 4.6 milliseconds to 38 milliseconds attack, and the release is 600 milliseconds to a second. So if we cut back over to our main camera here, in our particular case, when we're working with spoken word content, what we are seeing over here, I have it currently set to medium slow. So again, that's going to be the 4.6 milliseconds to 38 milliseconds attack and the 600 milliseconds to 1 second release. I think for dialogue, you could also go down to medium. Let me just go ahead and go down to medium. I think it's still going to sound fairly transparent here, but when you start going faster than that, let me go to a fast attack. Okay, here's a fast attack and a release, and this is going to sound a little bit more, especially on my voice, it'll tend to sound a little more nasally, and it will let go quicker, and it sounds like there's a little bit more of a pumping effect to it too, which is not very pleasant. So that's typically where I don't set this for spoken word, and why I will typically go
over here to the medium slow setting. And the way the medium slow setting works in essence is with spoken word, at least, is that and you can actually set a faster, like if you have a different device where you can just set the attack independently of the release. A lot of times I'll go with a very fast attack, but I'll keep that release pretty slow, like in the 500 milliseconds range. And this is, again, if you were here for the session that Lloyd did on compression, that was a suggestion from him. And what he suggests essentially is that it takes that compressed feeling away from it a little bit when you do that. So that's really helpful for spoken word especially. And then, of course, here we do have a blend. So I can actually mix both unprocessed or uncompressed audio and compressed audio together at a different, all the way from 0% to 100%. I need to take a quick sip of water. Give me just a second here. Okay. So we'll go ahead and bump that back up to 100%. This is, and again, the reason I set it to 100% in this context is that I'm really trying to manage the overall levels so that I can boost them up a little bit and kind of make them fairly kind of even and consistent, but also, in terms of the playback, you shouldn't have to crank your volume way, way up to hear me. And that's part of what we're accomplishing here. We do have makeup gain. So after the compressor here, we're adding an additional 7 dB of gain. So after it does its compressing, we add 7 dB back to the output. So that's what's going on there. Let me just run the silk by you really quickly. I'll go ahead and set it to 100% so it'll be really obvious. And then first I'm going to do the red and then the blue. The red, which you're now hearing, is going to be saturating and kind of emphasizing some of the high frequencies a little bit. Probably not a great fit for my voice, but for people that love that really crisp sound, and especially if you're doing a mix, like a broader mix and not just spoken word, that might make sense. And then here is the blue silk. This should have a little bit more focus on the lower frequencies and saturating a couple of the harmonics in the lower frequencies, just so you can get a sense for what that sounds like. All right. Let's go back to the overhead or the main camera, and let's get some questions from the audience here. Danny says there's been some interesting conversation going on. Let's see what we got going. Okay, first from Roland. Perversely, your A mic audio sounds better with EQ, but with no compression. Heh. Okay. Sounds better with EQ, but no compression. Okay, yeah, I mean, compression is a double-edged sword. If you do it too heavily, it starts to sound kind of radio announcer-ish, and it can be a little bit much, but it's a personal preference to some extent. And to some extent as well, if you need to be able to run your levels a little hotter, with a lot of voices, it's going to be necessary at some level. So there's some thoughts there. Claudio 5, I don't get it. What sense does discrete gain make? Well, it just has more to do with the electronic design than anything else. So this is discrete from one standpoint, but not discrete from another. So I think it really has to do with the way the preamplifier is designed. That the additional stages of gain are actually perhaps separate circuits. I'm not sure how it works entirely, but that's my sense. I think a lot of times when you see, at least on the lower end, sometimes I have found that and this can be on both the faders or on the gain, that while it has the appearance of continuous gain, in fact, behind the scenes, it's actually discrete, and they're just hiding that fact from you. So the nice thing about Rupert Neve designs here is that they are 100% transparent and honest with you. So it's a very honest sort of preamplifier. But also keep in mind, you do have, there is this trim here, which is much more continuous. So you can kind of get in between those gain stages if you need to. Technically, I don't know how that's working, but if I had to guess, I'm guessing that it may actually be applying a little bit of like a fader or attenuation to go below a little bit. And it may be adding an additional Class A preamp continuous stage on top of that. So it's probably doing some of that sort of magic behind the scenes, if you will. All right, what would you recommend for short to mid-range wireless audio, 2 channels required, pro level. You know what? Let's come back to that one after we get through the other questions. Anything else related to the audio here? Okay, Roland, I very much agree with fast attack and slower decay on the compressor. Compressor pumping is a very common audio mistake, and it's very noticeable. Completely agree, and especially with spoken word, it becomes really annoying, and it sounds horrible. And by fast, I think anything in like the 150 millisecond range is a little too fast. It's probably okay for a compressor, probably, or sorry, not a compressor, but a limiter. Typically a limiter will have a fairly fast release like that, but for a compressor, it gets really fatiguing to listen to over time. And Roland, I suspect you have fairly attuned listening. You've been listening for a while, and so you've kind of tuned your listening, and you can tell when there's compression and when there's not. So, all right, cool. Let me go ahead and shut down this camera here, the little mobile camera. I think we're good there. Just get that out of the way. And let's go to our question and answer for questions that were submitted ahead of time. So first up, from Philip, we have a question in regards to, he's using the Sennheiser AVX system and a MixPre 10.2, using timecode boxes, nano lockets to sync with camera on set. The problem is that there is a consistent 2-frame delay because of the AVX. So syncing video and audio via timecode in post, the sound is always 2 frames off. Is there a way to address that? Maybe a way to manipulate the timecode on the MixPre so that it is in sync afterwards. I think you'd probably want to contact Ambient for some tech support on that. I didn't run into that issue with mine, and I don't know of any way to kind of tweak that. Is there a way to tweak that in the MixPre? Let me just pull mine out here real quick. I don't think so. But just to be sure, let's take a look. Typically, when I jammed them in the past, I didn't have that problem with the nano lockets in particular. So I'm going to go into my timecode menu. In the jam menu, I don't think there's any way. You can choose your source, but I don't think there's any way to change anything. You can set your timecode, but that's all just manual. And there are UU bits. So I don't see any way to kind of tweak it by a couple of frames in the MixPre. So yeah, I would definitely contact Ambient and see if you can get that sorted out. They should be able to point you in the right direction there. But if that doesn't pan out, there are some things you can do in post as well. Let's go ahead and switch over to our Mac here. This is Tentacle Sync Studio. Now I know you're using an Ambient Nano Locket, but this is an app that comes with the Tentacle timecode boxes. And what's interesting about that is there are ways to adjust this in post. So if it's a consistent 2 frames, you can actually set an offset. So if I go ahead and set my frame rate, let's say I shot this at 2398, I can actually adjust it by 2 frames, either 2 frames faster or 2 frames slower. So I can tweak that on all of them. So that's another way to potentially address the problem. I know if you're delivering to post, you probably want to deliver something that's already perfectly in sync to make their workflow faster. But if you do have a need to take care of that in post, there are ways to do that. And that's an example of one way to do that. So thanks for the question, Philip. Hope that helps a little bit. All right, next up from Mike. I'm about to take the plunge into live streaming with something like an ATEM Mini. Congratulations, Mike. That's exciting. The issue of syncing sound and picture is well known, and you and many others solve this by routing sound through a camera. Have you ever tried applying delay to the sound, either through software or hardware? For example, the Behringer FBQ100, which among its many features has a delay line. If so, why did you decide not to adopt this and go with the sync in camera option? That is a fine question. And in fact, Mike, there are cases where we have instead done what you're talking about. So when I use the ATEM 2 ME production 4K switcher, or whatever the entire name of that thing is, it does have some balanced inputs. And in that case, what I do is I have my mixer set up. So I'm using an Allen & Heath SQ5. It has a delay, an output delay option. So I apply the delay at the mixer so that it is in sync with the camera through the switcher. So that's one thing we do. Now, if you're using an ATEM Mini, the nice thing about an ATEM Mini here, and we have the software control app up, we have 2 external inputs. So they call them mic 1 and mic 2. Technically, they're both line and mic level inputs. You can see you can switch it to line, microphone, or microphone plus plug-in power per input. And in addition to that, you can apply an offset right here. So I can come in here, for example, to mic 1, and I can set a delay of up to 8 frames. So I have some flexibility here. So if you do want to run the audio directly into one of the ATEM's inputs, you do have that delay ability here. So you don't need any additional hardware, which is a nice thing. And yes, of course, you could use something like the Behringer to get that offset as well if you needed to. And you can do that independently per mic input. So if the delay is a little bit different for whatever reason, you can apply different delays to the 2 different mic inputs. And that applies on, I know for sure it applies on the ATEM Mini Pro, ATEM Mini Pro ISO. I think it applies on the main, yeah, I'm 99% sure it applies on the ATEM Mini, the original as well. So that's an option for you in all of those cases. So you've got options. Now, question, why did I opt to do what I'm doing? It just works for me. In the case of the Canon C70, it has a balanced input and its converters are pretty good. So I just send the audio to the C70 in my case. So that works nicely. Otherwise, I have in some cases sent the audio to, for example, a Mix Pre or a Zoom F8, and then run that with an unbalanced 3.5 millimeter into the ATEM, and that works fine as well. So just for simplicity, for me, that's why I'm doing it through the camera. Just makes it a little bit more straightforward. Okay, next question from Zach. Zach asks, I'll be using our Synco D2 for an audiobook recording, male voice, this week, and I was wondering if you have any thoughts on best mic placement. So we're going to need some help from our voiceover friends here. Standard 16-inch to 24-inch from mouth above the head, out of frame, pointed down as we typically do for our camera video work, or positioned in front of face, straight on, pointed more or less straight to the mouth from about 12 inches away. I'll likely use the windsock, and I can probably experiment a little bit, but I thought I'd ask for your and the group's thoughts. So typically what I've seen in voiceover, Zach, is I've typically seen that almost always people, when they're using a shotgun microphone for voiceover, they'll typically aim it directly at their mouth. So that's not unusual at all. And usually 12 inches away, maybe depending on the sound you want, you can, if you need a little bit more of the proximity effect sound, you can move them up closer. If you want it to sound a little bit more natural, then I think 12 inches or right around there is probably a good distance. So that would probably be my first approach. And again, it depends on what you're looking for. If for whatever reason the talent needs a little bit more space and you want a more natural sound, I think booming from above with 16 inches is going to make a difference too. Of course, all of this depends on what the room is like that you're working in, how much treatment there is, any of that sort of business. So you're definitely going to need to take all of that into account as well. So those are my initial thoughts. If you don't have any treatment, you're probably going to want to have the microphone a little bit closer. If you do have treatment, I think you have the freedom to go a little bit farther away. But again, yeah, just definitely use your ears. I would probably start with the 12 inches and straight at the mouth. Windsocks, be careful. I don't know what you mean by windsock and exactly. If you're just talking about the foam, that's probably no big deal, and that will help with plosives. I would consider using a pop shield of some sort or a pop filter. But I wouldn't use a full-on windsock like the fur covers. The problem with those is that they do start to cut out the high-frequency sound. You can use them as a tool if you need to cut some of that high-frequency sound because the talent's voice is very bright and has a lot of sibilance, then maybe you do want to use that, but otherwise I probably wouldn't default to using it. I'd keep the windsock off if you're talking about one of the fur covers. So those are some thoughts there, and if anyone has thoughts out in the chat, we'd love to hear those as well. Rob says, for Zach, approximately 6 inches from corner of mouth to deal with plosives and leave the wind cover on. I agree with that. If you're talking by wind cover, I assume you mean the foam cover as well. So yeah, I think that's a fine choice as well, off to one side. Position it so that they can get to their script, clear access to their script and they're comfortable. That'll be really important, of course, for voiceover, but yeah, I think that's good advice. Thanks for that, Rob. With it at 6 inches, you're going to definitely pick up more proximity effect. So if you want that, that's good. If not, again, just back it off to taste. All right, let's go ahead and go out to our chat. And if you do have a question you'd like to submit, go ahead and just put Curtis at Curtis Judd Audio. That'll make it easier for Danny to find it. So we'll pop back out to our main cam here. And Danny's going to scour through the chat here and see what she can find for us. All right, first up from Peter. Just to note that RX is on sale again until July 31st. Updated price is $99 for RX standard, and regular price is at $199, down from $399. Wow. So some good pricing there. In fact, we just got a new license for me on my work computer, which I was excited about. But yeah, good pricing. Thanks for bringing that up, Peter. That's helpful for people. So if you are looking into RX, now's a good time to buy. All right, what would you recommend for short to mid-range wireless audio? 2 channels required, pro level. Mid-range, 25 feet, but you're talking about pro level gear. So I use Audio Limited A10. I'm very happy with it. It works great. Never had a problem with it at a range of 25 feet. Even with just the included whip antennas, the quarter wave antennas, the short ones. And then certainly when you add additional antennas from there, it does great. So that's been a really great system for me. I'm assuming you need a dual channel receiver. So Electrosonics is another brand. I don't know their product line quite as well, but they're very popular amongst the professional production sound mixers for a good reason. They're very reliable. They sound good. So that's a good choice as well. Wizicom is another very popular option. Zaxcom is another option. We had, what was his, we had, we had a fellow on a few weeks ago, or a few months ago now. He talked a little bit about his new Zaxcom kit. So if you wanted to get a kind of a little bit more insight into how that system works, just do a search for Curtis Judd Audio Zaxcom. And I think that should come up and you can get some insights into what his experience has been with those. He really likes them, by the way, for a variety of reasons. And I think one of the big ones was that the battery life on the transmitter was tremendous. Very, very good on those. So but Zaxcom is kind of a I don't know if I want to call it a closed system, but it's like Apple products, kind of like if you're all in on Apple products, and that makes a really good ecosystem, it works really well. But if you only, like if you have an iPhone and then you have a PC and you have an Android tablet, then it's the value proposition isn't quite as good. And with Zaxcom, it's kind of a similar thing to like the wireless system really, really shines when you have a Zaxcom mixer as well, recorder mixer. So anyway, those are some thoughts on that. Hopefully we understood the context to your question well. All right, next from Roland. What can I buy, not build, to bring line level balanced output from a channel strip via either 1/4 inch or XLR into a mic level 1/8 inch input on a Sony a7S III camera? You can buy a Sound Devices Mix Pre, Zoom F8, F4. I think you're looking for like a little converter box of some sort, but the way I typically do it is I use one of those recorder mixers. There are probably easier ways to do it. Mike Stranks, if you're there, could you help? I don't know. Here's what Mike says. You need a DI box, various types and prices available. So you're basically running the DI box the opposite direction, I assume. I use the Whirlwind PCDI, which should do the job there, but you can also that's a dual channel one. You could probably do a single channel one in your case, unless you're trying to send stereo. All right, have you used a UTP snake for analog audio over Cat5, Cat6, Cat7? Something like the 12-channel Sound Tools Cat Rack. Is there much impact on sound quality? I have not. Anyone who's done live sound, please let us know. For me, I've have a little bit more experience with Dante, so using the full Dante kind of ecosystem, as opposed to using the my SQ5 has basically a digital snake kind of thing that you can run over a Cat5, Cat6, Cat7 cable, but I've never used it just because I don't do a lot of live sound and I don't have a stage box to connect it to. So, but if anyone else does, definitely let us know. I will say this, it's all reliant on the converters within whatever is the source of the audio. So if we're talking about a stage box, for example, it's going to be dependent on the quality of the converters and the preamplifiers in the stage box. Once it gets to digital, from there, it's not going to change the quality unless you're having really, really serious problems in terms of getting a solid signal through there and which is having to do a lot of error correction and you're dropping packets, that's the only problem you'll have in terms of audio quality from that point on. Southpaw 516, so this is from Roland. Curtis Audio convinced me that the mix pre is the way to go for most applications. I'm now on a Mark II with noise assist, and it's magic in a small room with AC running. Yeah, I agree. That's a great little setup for sure. And by the way, Roland, you can use that as your converter if you don't want to buy a DI box. So you've already got the gear if you wanted to use that. Great answer on delay. Thanks. Food for thought there. Thank you for the question, Mike. Very much appreciate that. Rob was referring to the foam cover. So yeah, so agreed on that. There's almost no cost to a foam cover. It's pretty much upside. But pop filters, when you are doing voiceover, typically I'll bring out a pop filter. Just because, again, you're generally not on camera, and they generally will work better than foam, but if you're getting good results with the foam, that's fine too. All right, Mark Barnett's camera crisis. I hope you're okay, Mark. Don't worry, everything's going to be okay with the camera. I was at a comedy club, and I had a Zoom H6 plugged into the mixing board through the RCA. There was 60 hertz buzz going through the speakers, and everyone could hear live. My fault? There are a lot of factors there, and I don't know if it's your fault or not. Mike, if you have some input here, it could be. How were you powering the H6? Was it battery powered? If it was battery powered, the chances of creating a ground loop are a little bit lower, but you could have faulty cables. That could create problems if the mixing board doesn't have any sort of filtering built into it for the outputs. You really shouldn't be introducing hum to a system when you're just tapping into the outputs like that. But we don't know enough information about the particular board that was there. Could be, but probably not, is my guess. But if anyone has other insights, definitely let us know in the chat there.
Okay, this is back to the other.
All right, if you're having to use even a foam windshield with your mic position, if you're even having to use a foam windshield, your mic position is wrong or your mic is not very good. Even a foam will alter the frequency response. That's true. I would say this. I have found that for very good ears, yes, it will make a difference. But I think a difference typically in my experience, unless it's a really, really, really heavy foam, is pretty close to negligible. Again, this is going to be, you have to make a choice here. In voiceover, I would typically use a pop filter just to, why not? There's almost no cost to using a pop filter. So that's my thought on that.
It's a long conversation.
Oh, there's even more. Using a windshield of any kind may be an EQ choice, which is fine. But if it's to reduce popping, then the mic is in the wrong place. That's a fair perspective. I won't argue with that, Mike. I agree that foams can help with absorbing some high-frequency reverb in dodgy rooms. Yeah. On the other hand, I would say be careful with that. It doesn't make that much of a difference. So it's not like a magic cure for reverberant rooms. The cure for reverberant rooms is removing the reverb. But it can help a tiny bit. Tiny bit. You're battery powered. Okay, yeah, I wouldn't think that would introduce any sort of ground loop on that basis alone. Faulty cables or something else funny going on. The Zoom H6 is a consumer grade device, for better or worse. So it's not. Yeah, the short answer, Mark, unfortunately, I don't know. It's possible, but I wouldn't think likely given the circumstances. All right, Mark, what would you recommend as a good extended length for a cheapish boom pole for static interviews fixed to a C-stand? Is there any advantage to something smaller other than weight? Let me take a sip while I think about that. I'm going to grab something. So I do have a couple of secondary boom poles. So this is a K-Tech. It's basically the same. It's similar to the my main boom pole. It's the Avalon line. It's made out of graphite. This is a shorter pole, and it is lighter weight. It's easier to travel with because it collapses to a smaller length. This one only has the XLR exit on the bottom, which is not as convenient when you are booming all day long by hand. But on a pole or on a C-stand, this works really well. So that's typically what I'll use. It just makes it easier to get it around. That's one of the big advantages, really. That's my perspective. I do have a Rode boom pole as well, which is much heavier. It's aluminum. It's longer. It works great on a stand as well, although you may have to be careful about the foam they put on there. It's not really a pro boom pole, but the foam on there can get in the way of the different hooks that you can put in the grip heads on C-stands to mount them. So you want to be a little bit careful about that. But those are some of my thoughts on that. I see... I think once you're on a boom pole, as long as nobody, hits the stand, you should be fine. Doesn't like even shock mounts. I mean, I'd still use a shock mount if you're doing paid work, but shock mount actually can still be helpful. If there are vibrations in the area, then a shock mount can still be helpful. So I still use one, but those are my thoughts on that. But yeah, I think you can get away with a much less expensive boom in that case. Incidentally, I got this one periodically. I think it was Gotham Sound had this on special at the end of the year, one year. So I got it for a substantial discount from its regular price. And so that particular model was the one that they had on special. So I picked it up then, and it's been great. Randy, I've used the radial solution for 2x2 audio with UTP, saw no audio degradation. Great to know. Thank you for that, Randy. So there's a converter there with unshielded twisted pair cabling. And I think that, again, really it's going to come down to the converters and the preamps. Hey, Aaron. Thanks for joining us here. I keep thinking I should get the MixPre 3 for the noise assist. Does it have any capability to be controlled over the network to disable each channel? It does not over the network, no. It does have there's a mobile app that you can run, and I'm trying to think if the mobile app has the ability to turn off. I mean, you can control some things, frankly, not a whole lot of things on that app. And I don't think it has the ability to turn on or off the noise assist feature in particular. And with noise assist, there's basically no settings. The only setting, there's one setting, and that is how much attenuation do you want it to do of the noise. So it's a very straightforward and simple type of thing. But again, as people mentioned before, I think it's pretty helpful when you have steady state noise and you're close miking. So it can be really, like in a live stream situation, I think it could be really helpful. So unfortunately, no network control. Mark, thanks so much for the super chat. Really appreciate that. Thanks for also bringing... Do you have a joke for us? Go ahead and drop that in the chat if you do. All right, Mark. Thanks. I thought the same, but we'll get a radial ice cube that Zach suggested. Yes, I have a radial ice cube as well. That could be useful, although I don't know how... I don't know. Do they make that with an RCA set of connectors? It's a good idea. Having an isolating transformer is a good idea, definitely, if you're going to connect to a soundboard. Oh, back to Mike. I'm a fan of metal popper stoppers, but have reservations about foam for voiceovers. Very good. Fair point. Southpaw, other than more space between the mic, how can I get more separation between stereo mics? I thought about putting a bit of foam or something in the middle. I think what I would look at is the different stereo miking techniques. Is the two that first come to mind is ORTF if you're looking for more separation between channels, or doing mid-side. And the nice thing about mid-side is you can dial in exactly how much separation in post, which is really, really nice. So if you're looking for more separation, I would look at those two, do a little bit more research on those two stereo recording methods. But ORTF is going to be certainly provide you more separation channel to channel versus an XY or anything like that. So usually you have to space the mics apart a certain amount and they're angled away from each other, kind of like that. Mid-side, you have a cardioid up front, and then you have a figure of 8 side to side. And so, again, the nice thing about mid-side is you can control exactly how much separation you end up getting in post, which is really, really nice. I'm glad I took your advice and rented a MixPre 2 for recording at an air show. The Blue Angels and Thunderbirds were both there, and I probably would have messed up the levels on the Tascam. Yeah, that's a use case where I think 32-bit float wide dynamic range recording is really helpful. So glad that worked out for you and that you were able to rent one. So cool. And cool that you got to see the Blue Angels and the Thunderbirds in one show. Roland says, over to Aaron, as Curtis Jet Audio notes, I think you can enable disable inputs with the Bluetooth enabled iPhone app. Yeah, so it's, again, that app is pretty straightforward, not super sophisticated. You don't have access to the whole menu system. I think we ran through it in a video before, and I don't think we're going to get it out right now because I've got my phone is playing the outro music, and I don't want to. Anyway, yeah, we can come back to that, Aaron. In fact, if you want to contact me directly, I can give you some more details on that as well. So Curtis@learnlightandsound.com. Dave Dialect, hello. I haven't tuned in for a while. Good to see you streaming still. The pleasure is all mine. Thanks for coming by, Dave. And if you're in the northern hemisphere, hope your summer is going well. If you're in the southern, that your winter is going well. And we'll see you around. Zach, I have noticed a slight brightness difference with and without the foam cover and usually opt not to use one. I may run out and buy a pop filter this week. Thanks, everyone. All right. Good luck, Zach, on the voiceover session. Sounds like a fun one. All right, Danny, scouring the chat. We're done? There's no more chat? She's doing her best to filter and get everything. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and see if I've got while we're here, to answer Aaron's question, if we have the sound devices Wingman app. I do have it on my iPad, so let me just power up my MixPre 3 and make sure that the Bluetooth is on. And we will attempt to connect. All right. Aaron, I am super excited for you to get a MixPre 3. All right. Go into System. Go into Bluetooth. That's now on. Okay. So Bluetooth is on there. Let's go into the Wingman app over here. And we're going to have to connect. We have that connected now. We can actually show the iPad if you wouldn't mind putting that on the screen, Danny. Okay. There we go. Go ahead and pull Zach's chat down for now. So this is a pretty straightforward. You have the transport controls, of course. So I can start and stop recording here. I have the ability to undo, so if I have a false take for whatever reason, I can do that. Again, remember that this is all kind of set up for production sound mixing. You can set some metadata, like the name, you have notes. And it's a little bit different on the iPad, it looks like. So we're just connected there, and that's, here we can go to the file list, we can go into reports. So really it's not, like you can't even really set the gain or anything from the app here. Why is it not showing? It looks like it just disconnected for some reason. I haven't had that issue before. But we probably do have a lot of RF going in this room right now. Or maybe I disconnected. Let's just kind of throw that out here and start over. There we go. Okay. You can arm and disarm channels, depending on what you have configured already. So yeah, there's quite a bit of limitation in terms of what you can and cannot do with the app. So just keep that in mind, Aaron. It's not like a full control app like you might hope for this. So it'd be cool if they could do that. It doesn't also allow you to monitor from your iOS device, or I think it actually also runs on Android. So you cannot plug in headphones to your Android or iOS device and monitor the sound of the recorder, just so you're aware. Bluetooth just couldn't handle that much bandwidth, so they did not implement that. Okay. What else have we got in the chat there? From Roland, have you used the Scorpio recorder with Cypress DNS noise reduction? Do you know if they're network controllable? I did get a chance to test a Scorpio for about a month when it first came out, but that was before the DNS plugin was available, so I have not used the DNS plugin as yet. I can run the DNS plugin also on my A88, but I haven't had a need for it, so I haven't purchased it yet. It's kind of pricey, as I recall. In fact, let me just go ahead and pull that up here real quick. I think it was sounddevices.com. Let's go online. We got to our online store. We can go ahead and switch over to the Mac here. Let's go to the plugin store. Cedar DNS is $1,800 to $3,600 US, so I have not had a chance to work with it. It depends on how many instances you need. So if you need 2 instances, it's $1,800, and then up to $3,600 for 8 instances. So I think that would be channels or buses, or that's what the instances refers to. Even the Wingman app on the 8 series, well, it's not the Wingman app on 8 series, it's a different app. And it does allow you to have, it does have more control, but I don't think it has additional controls for those things as well. So it's a good question. And I don't know that Aaron is necessarily in the market for that. I think he's looking more at the MixPre, given his situation. Mark, can you recommend a budget shotgun mic for ambient recording on ENG jobs? We use XT305s as cameras that have XLR and Phantom. So if you need a really budget microphone, the Audio-Technica AT875R is pretty good. It's a short shotgun, so it's not super isolating, but it is probably the best sounding really short shotgun microphone I've used. It's less than $200. If you can bump up into the $300 and some range, the Deity S-Mic 2 I like quite a bit. Going up from there is the probably the Rode NTG5 is one of the better sounding ones from my point of view. Rode NTG3 is good, and then you're just getting more expensive from there. So those are some thoughts. Again, you were asking about budget. So for the really tight budget, for less than $200, that AT875R is a pretty good one worth looking at for ENG jobs. All right, from Mike. Stereo miking, a Jecklin disc is worth experimenting with as a stereo miking technique. That I have no familiarity with at all. So when Mike starts doing his live stream, we'll need to check in on his live stream and see how a Jecklin disc works. I'd be curious to see that, Mike. So I can't wait for you to get your ATEM so we can start joining your live stream as well. Midside stereo is brilliant for playing with the spread in post and is mono compatible without the risk of phase anomalies. So even more reasons potentially there to go with midside. And this is the last one, Danny tells me. This is it for today. Sonoga, in what instances would you use 2 audio devices, a lavalier mic and a shotgun mic, to capture one audio source? That's a great question. In my cases, I did it a lot with corporate video where I was doing even just a seated interview. I would mic with both a lavalier microphone and a boom microphone because that would give me more options in post. I didn't usually keep both of them, but if there was a problem with one of them, I could just go with the other. If one of them sounded better than the other, which was typically the case, then I could go with the one that sounded better and drop the other one. So in those cases, that's in TV and film production, they almost always do that. So all the actors that are on screen are wired up with lavalier microphones, and they also boom when they can. So they're always giving themselves those choices in post for that type of thing. But even with corporate video, I was doing some of that as well. So hopefully that makes sense. All right, thanks everybody for joining our live stream today. It's great to have you here with us. Hope you have a great week. Get out there and make some great sound, and we'll talk to you next time.